Good morning, everybody. Today is June 1st, and holy shit, it's June already. How the hell did that happen? My name is Ryan. Today I'm going to talk about using the EIDL loan for self-employed individuals. But first, I want to ask you to please hit that like button on this video so this video can make it out to as many people as possible that need this information. And also subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already to keep up to date with all the latest stuff with the SBA and the IRS and all that crap going on right now. Also, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I will try to answer them as best as I can. And also, if you have any requests or if you want to see information done on video from me, also please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to share that. I'd be happy to do that for you guys. Okay, so talking about self-employed individuals and how to use the EIDL loan for those expenses or expenses that might be considered a little ambiguous. All right, so one thing I understand for self-employed individuals is that most individuals have one checking account and one credit card for both their personal and their business. And the first thing I would recommend is just to get that separated out. You know, get a separate business checking account for your business and keep your personal account for your personal expenses, but never commingle the two. And I recommend this outside of SBA related stuff. You know, like this is just good practice to do for your business, is to separate your business dealings with your personal dealings. Then I recommend taking it one step further and getting another checking account for your SBA EIDL loan proceeds. That way it's really easy for you to track where your funds are going for what expenses. And it's easier for you to prove to the SBA how you're paying for these expenses and where those EIDL funds are going. All right, so then with that aside, the next thing I want to talk about is setting up a expense reimbursement policy for your business. This is highly recommended because it basically passes the smell test for IRS audits. So for an SBA audit, this would definitely pass the smell test too. And this is probably the most conservative way to handle these ambiguous expenses. And you know, in a time of uncertainty, and you know, I'm not really sure. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure how the SBA is going to handle these things. So I'm just going to recommend the most conservative way that you should take to handle these things so that it's as foolproof as possible. So setting up an expense reimbursement policy is basically a policy that your company has that tells you what kind of expenses your company can reimburse its workers for. And its worker would be you personally, and your company is your company. So now you want to think of it as like two separate things. You know, your company reimburses you personally for these ambiguous expenses. And these expenses can include like your cell phone bill, or maybe some subscription expenses that you might have, like Microsoft or Adobe, something like that, where you pay out of your personal account, but you do use for business. And the third thing we're going to talk about is vehicles, because those are treated a little differently from regular expenses in terms of reimbursements and things like that. So to set up an expense reimbursement policy, it's simple. You don't have to submit it to anybody. You just I would suggest looking up a template online, like Google expense reimbursement policy template, and take a template, reconfigure it to match your business. And you know, basically it's a set of rules that tells your company's workers what kind of expenses are reimbursable, and you know, what kind of documentation you need to submit to your company in order for your company to reimburse those expenses. Like, it probably sounds a little silly doing it if you're just a single owner, employee, single worker company. It sounds silly, but like I said before, this is just the most foolproof way I can think of for you to do this. So set up an expense reimbursement policy. From there, everything I'm going to tell you from now on, I would suggest you run through the guidelines of this policy. So the first example is your cell phone bill. I mean, a lot of self-employed individuals have their cell phone, their personal cell phone, and it's very common to just have one cell phone. Like, most people aren't going to get a second cell phone just for the business. You know, it just kind of complicates things. So you have your personal cell phone that you pay for personally, but use it for business. How do you handle that? So for taxes, what you do is you portion out the amount that you use for business versus personal, and you reimburse yourself, or you can deduct that amount on taxes. So if your cell phone bill is $100 a month, you use it 50% for business, 50% for personal, you can deduct $50 of it each month. Same thing here with the EIDL loan. If you use 50% of it for business, then you can use your EIDL funds to pay for 50% of that cell phone bill. And again, you run it through the expense reimbursement procedures. So you pay for the cell phone bill entirely from your personal account. Then what you have to do is submit like an expense reimbursement request to your company for 50% of that cell phone bill. So if your bill is $100, you submit like a reimbursement request for $50, and then your company will pay for $50 of that cell phone bill, and you can use that, and you can use the EIDL funds to do that. I hope that makes sense. I know it sounds a little confusing, and it sounds silly doing it for, you know, a single owner company. But this is the most foolproof way to do this. Another example would be like subscriptions, like Adobe or Microsoft, like software subscriptions that you might use personally or might pay personally and use for business. Same thing here, portion it out to the percentage that you think you use for business versus personal, and then reimburse yourself from your business for that. And you can do this for any expenses that seem ambiguous, you know, kind of like one thing is ambiguous is like home office expenses, like utilities and stuff, or if you have an actual home office like I do, and you're buying like supplies, like printer supplies or office supplies that you might use for both business and personal. Same thing here, portion it out. So the third thing I want to talk about, and I've been getting a lot of questions on, are vehicles. And a lot of Lyft and Uber drivers have been asking me how to handle vehicle payments or vehicle expenses. And so I'll talk about that right now. And just keep in mind that I'm only talking about vehicles that are owned by you personally, but are used for your business. I'm not talking about company vehicles owned by the company. I'm talking about personal vehicles used for business. All right, so I don't really recommend using your EIDL funds to pay for your vehicle loan or car payments, because even through a reimbursement procedure, because vehicles are just treated differently in terms of the IRS. I also don't recommend you use the EIDL proceeds for down payments for a new vehicle, even if your old vehicle broke down, just because this is a personal vehicle. But there are some things you still can take advantage of in terms of using your EIDL funds to pay for vehicle expenses. So the most common thing is being reimbursed for mileage. So if you work for a larger company and you drive a lot, you know, you're in sales, and they, you know, if you're a W-2 employee, you drive a lot, what you do is you track your mileage, and then you submit your mileage to your company, and they'll reimburse you a dollar amount for those mileage. Same thing here. Same thing is what I would recommend, is you track your mileage, and you should be doing that anyway. You track your mileage that you incur for business, and then you multiply it by the current federal IRS mileage rate, which for 2020 is 57.5 cents per mile. So you drove 10,000 miles, that is $5,750. So what I would do is track your mileage, track your business mileage, and same thing as before, submit that mileage times 57.5 cents to your company for reimbursement, and have your company reimburse you for that mileage. It's fairly simple, you know, you don't have to track insurance payments or car payments or interest or repairs or maintenance. You just track the mileage, and you know, from my experience as a tax professional, mileage usually is a much more advantageous deduction than tracking the actual expenses like gas and repairs and stuff like that. I recommend not using your EIDL funds for down payments for cars or for monthly car payments, but I would recommend using it to reimburse yourself for business miles driven. That's all I got for today. Thanks for joining me. Please hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and have a good day. I'll see you next time. Stay safe.